Hello, I'm Ann Willett, Senior Pastor at Northaven Church. As a church that values social justice, Northaven has always believed that faith and justice go hand in hand. In our Northaven Voices interviews this month, we will feature church members and community leaders who will share their stories and insights on how we can continue to strive to be an anti-racist congregation. I hope you will enjoy.
Hey, good morning again, Northaven, and everybody on our online worshiping community. I'm so glad that you've joined us, and I am absolutely delighted to have Earnest McMillan with us today. This week I've been listening to the information about John Lewis's life, Representative John Lewis, and covering his funeral and all that. And his biographer, John Meacham, made an interesting comment. He said that if you don't know the old story, then you can't create the new story. And I can't think of anybody better to talk to than Earnest about the story of the civil rights movement and really the story of many justice movements throughout the last 50 to 60 years. He's been involved in all of it, and just a fascinating life story. I hope you've had an opportunity to read the article in D Magazine. So this will just give you a brief glimpse into his life and into who he is. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. So Earnest, thank you for being here. And let me start with a question about your initial getting into the civil rights movement. It was 1963, you were graduating high school. There were all these things, major moments that year in the movement. Medgar Evers was assassinated in his driveway. The March on Washington in DC, where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And then in September, the 4 young girls were killed in the church in Birmingham. So all of those moments were happening right as you graduated high school as the president of the Honor Society and the president of your senior class. And you were enrolling in a very prestigious school, Morehouse in Atlanta. And you decided not to go to school at that point, but instead to become part of the movement. So tell us a little bit about that time and how that happened.
Well, coming out of a community that was intact, North Dallas, which was Freemanstown, coming from a family that was involved in civic duties and church activities, I was pretty much sheltered in a sense from a lot of the direct harmful stigmas of racism and racial attacks. But nonetheless, I witnessed from riding on the back of the bus with a sign that said, "This is your spot," to seeing colored only signs on the restrooms and water fountains, to being denied to try on clothes downtown, and to be denied to attend the state fair anytime I wanted to when it was open, or being able to sit in a theater where I wanted to sit. So I had experienced those kind of things, even injustices of people who were innocent of crimes being in prison or even electrocuted. And so being aware of those things and going into the Deep South to Morehouse, where my father was living, and a school he really was hoping he could get me into because it's one of his dreams, was a big change. And so just before entering the school, the March on Washington took place. And as you spoke, the little girls were bombed in Birmingham. The Birmingham Rebellion had taken place. All these things were just adding up and compounding and accumulating. And so it became the point in my life where enough is enough. I think the straw that broke the camel's back, ironically, in a sense, was the murder of John F. Kennedy. And so it's like, what is going on? And being in a town that in Atlanta, Georgia, that was highly segregated. Even though we had prestigious colleges and universities there, the town was still very much segregated, and those declared to be progressively so. So we experienced things like stores that would not hire Black people in major department stores, or restaurants that would deny you seating. And so those things were taking place. And I reached a point where enough was enough. And so I got involved with a demonstration near downtown Atlanta, protesting the restaurant of Lester Maddox, who became the governor a few years later. But he wielded axe handles to keep Black people out of his restaurant. So protesting that, and then falling in line, so to speak, with other activists from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, people like Worth Long and George Mance, Jim Foreman, Ruby Robinson, and Julian Bond. People like that became my mentors in a sense. Their offices, the national headquarters, were only a few blocks from where my dormitory was. So having an occasion to cut class or go visit them and see the beehive of activities there led me to decide it's time for me to get involved. It's time for me to do my part. So it was a kind of a longing I had to be involved. I wanted to play my part, contribute something to what was happening. And this became like just a step away from me making that step. I didn't consider it courageous or brave, anything like that. It's just kind of like doing my duty or just doing my part. And not sure what all it would encounter in my life or how it might throw things off. It was just dealing in that moment what I felt I had to do.
Tell us a little bit about what that work was with SNCC, because you were there for a few years and then came back to Dallas maybe in 1965 and really kind of had to deal with some of the feelings that generated because you were witness to so much violence and hatred. And so I guess my question is, first of all, tell us a little bit about the work you did with SNCC during that time. And then when you came back, how did you find the resilience to continue to work in social justice movements even after that, after what you witnessed? Yeah.
My title, as 150 other young people were called field secretaries. That was the SNCC makeup, full-time community organizers who were free to work all their free time, all their active waking hours toward organizing in the community. And organizing at that time meant getting people aware of the right to vote, getting them involved, providing them with the support, the knowledge, the education, the connections, the support they needed to become more active as citizens. So my first stop was in Southwest Georgia. The headquarters of the Southwest movement for SNCC was Albany, Georgia. And it had been involved in sit-ins and freedom rides and protests, even riots. But it was the headquarters for the Southwest Georgia SNCC chapter. And so being there and then becoming a field secretary in a county north of that, Lee County, Georgia, which was very much a rural county, just walking the trails and visiting the farmers and tenant farmers and witnessing churches being bombed, or people being intimidated, or losing their jobs, being kicked off their land for merely standing up and registering to vote. So it was the courageous actions of those people, ordinary people who just said the same thing I was saying, enough is enough. It's time for us to act and take part. And so the Voting Rights Act had passed in '64, and so I was there at that wave it hit. But having the police, the sheriff's department were the extra legal arm to make sure the status quo stayed, as it would be, as it was. And so being chased by night riders, whether it be police or sheriff or Klansmen, was nothing unusual. I had to learn how to drive at night with my headlights off to flee the police or the sheriffs or the Klansmen. Sometimes they were the same. And so we had cars fixed where we could manually dislodge our brake lights. So when we hit the brakes, it would not show stop, a red light would not pop up. So it would give us a chance to make some moves. So being chased, witnessing people kicked off their land or churches being bombed, even houses being shot into was what became a part of the life of being a SNCC. And to me, it was just the support we had within the organization, the common experience we all shared. We were all working in the Deep South. There was no better county or lesser violent county than anywhere from Arkansas to North Carolina or Virginia. So we were all involved in the same thing at the same time. So having shared experience and shared vision and practicing what we want to see for the future within the organization. So we practice democracy within the SNCC. Sometimes it may take to 3 o'clock in the morning to come up with a decision. But at that time we felt like one man, one vote, or one person, one vote meant the same for us inside the organization. There was no hierarchy or chain of command, so to speak. So there was kind of a democracy there. So we practiced what we want to see for the future. And so that support and that battleground state, but still having a haven of a circle of trust and brothers and sisters who come together, kind of helped sustain and overcome, because I was afraid many times and I felt unsafe many times. But the prevailing feeling was we're doing what had to be done, and we had people counting on us and we counted on them. So it was a kind of interdependence that we had to show up. And so I did. Yeah.
Wow, you did show up. I do think as I learn more about, we have book groups that are doing white fragility right now, but by Robin DiAngelo, and we're trying to have conversation about our understanding of whiteness and how that differs. And one of the points is that there's a sense of individualism that is less prominent in the Black community. There is more of a sense of a collective identity and a shared history and a collective identity. And you've just noted that beautifully as one of your resources for resilience.
Well, I don't want to say we were idealistic in that sense. We had people with ego problems. We had people who were stupid and didn't want to make changes and didn't want to make concessions. So we still have that individuality there that we had to, but I think the all-encompassing thing that we're in a special time. We need to really unite. We need to come together. And the opposition was clear and right there in our face. So we knew what was opposing us, and that became the major issue, not the individual differences.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So your activism when you left that movement continued in the anti-war movement and in many, many different social justice movements for economic, political, social justice, just about of every kind. And, it's really been your life and your legacy for the last 50 to 60 years. Which is amazing. You have told me stories about being falsely arrested, being forced to flee the country, being locked up for 3 years under really trumped up charges. And yet, when we talk about this, you really do have such a warmth about you. And I believe that it would be so easy to slip into a sense of cynicism and anger. And so tell me a little bit about that. Yours got such a huge smile, and I want to know where that comes from.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure where it comes from either at times. But the whole thing I think that keeps me moving is the fact that we are constantly learning and teaching and learning. It's a reciprocity there. So being side by side with young people and want to help them to get the light, we have to set an example. And so internally that works out to me to where I have to get myself together and learn how to forgive, how to overcome when it's setbacks, how to bounce back. And so my examples were people in front of me too, like my uncles and my grandfather. So just calling their name. My grandfather built a hospital in Dallas, one of the first, if not the first black hospital, because there was no other alternative for people to get medical care. In the face of Dallas having a 3,000 membership Klansmen and burning people's homes and having riots like in Tulsa, Sherburne, different places like that. He managed to do amazing things under those circumstances. So what I was doing was nothing compared to what he did. So I could look at those kind of examples and then see myself as being an example of some others as well. And so it was just a process of feeling that it's detrimental to our struggle to be stuck in a stubborn position. And I'm known to be stubborn, but to be able to be open and learn and to make adjustments is a part of just surviving. And so that was a part of me. And so I think the love and support and brotherhood and fellowship we had at SNCC was the fuel that kept us going. And in the community, the love we embraced, people who had very little were willing to open their homes to us, let us sleep in their house on the floor or whatever, to share their meals when I'm taking somebody's food from them, you know? And so just having those constant examples day after day after day, night after night, and seeing people standing up and facing danger, and who am I to, you know, to complain when I've seen all these brave souls. And so that was a part of it. And I think growing up in a church and helped me somewhat, having a father as a minister and teaching about forgiveness and love, and then seeing that example practice in the community on a almost a routine basis, just it's contagious. And so I can't complain. I can't take credit for anything other than what I'm seeing around me so far, around me on the people I love and care for and work with. So that was the fuel for me to keep going.
That's amazing. You know, one of those, well, let me ask this question first. So a lot of people are talking about the fact that this is a tipping point, particularly after the murder of George Floyd. But, you know, one of the other things that we're seeing is, you know, you were there when the Voting Rights Act was passed, but now we're still voting, or we're still trying to rid ourselves of so much voter suppression. You fought against police brutality, and yet we see that same thing arising in George Floyd and others, Breonna Taylor and many others. So do you think this is a tipping point for us? And what would you want Northaven to know about how to move forward towards racial reconciliation and equity?
Well, I definitely feel in my bones that it's a tipping point, that something new is happening, something fundamentally different from the past. It's the amount of cities involved in protesting and fighting back against police brutality. Over 500 or 600 cities, 40 countries around the world are giving support to that. I don't think at any given day in the 60s we had anything near that happening. To have I want to say, intergenerational approach to this too, where young people who never stepped out before are stepping out and taking the reins in their hands and moving forward. And then seeing the multi-ethnic flavor, a character as well, is not a black thing. And people seeing how we're not just talking about black people, we're talking about how this impacts the whole history and so of this country and its people and society. And so I think those are new ingredients, the quantitatively different in terms of numbers and the qualitative differences in terms of the kind of organization, the kind of outreach, and also with the opposition as well. I see one thing we kind of minimize is a lot of the strides made progress during the 60s were counterposed by extra legal affairs, COINTELPRO, FBI, J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing the paramilitary, the winking of the eye to people who counteract that and disguising it as patriotism and so forth. Yes. I'm seeing those things as well. So we need to be alert and wary of saying this is going to be just a trip down the memory lane. It's not that. It's a lot is at stake. The status of this nation in the world, the status of lives every day, and the policies and laws that will be made are all going to be impacted by what we do today. So there's all kind of stakes at the table. And I see we need to not only be clear and have a deep understanding of what this is about, we need to really have a sense of developing a capacity for empathy as well. And so I'm seeing that as an important part for our allies and supporters to understand that solidarity is quite different from having sympathy or having pity or for being charitable. Yes. Those are qualitatively different things. When you see yourself and other people and you reunite because that them is also you, when you begin to link that up in that sense and see that justice for one is justice for all, that is the kind of mentality or the kind of attitude or approach we need to have. And I think that's solidarity is maybe a word that kind of gets fuzzy at times, but to me it's clear about recognizing leadership, helping to understand the true narrative of this country, not the one that's crammed down our throats. For example, I would recommend reading, there's one particular book called The Counter-Revolution, 1776. It talks about what side were the slaves on during the American Revolution of 1776. And you'll see by reading that book that slaves were pulling for the British in many ways because the British were formulating an abolitionist approach to slavery and wanted to abolish it in the early 1770s.
Yes.
And that was a fast approaching debate going on, and it was imminent that soon, within the next 5-6 years, that England would declare slavery is illegal. And so that kind of sped up the need for the plantation owners and the slave owners in the United States to hurry up and get in to protect themselves and protect their so-called property and power. Mm. So I think we need to look at the whole way this whole country interprets. I grew up seeing pulling for cavalry killing Native Americans because that's what was the John Waynes were the heroes. So having that, we need to take a step back and take another look at that whole narrative. And sometimes I think we get to the point where everything we've been taught has been a lie in many ways. So we need to really reinvestigate the story that's been fed us and look at how we are triggered by certain things too. Mm-hmm. And so looking at the triggers that cause us to want to get back or look down or frown upon the just struggle of people of color, I think we need to investigate. And so I think life is something we just don't want to just live, not in order not to die, but our life has to mean something. And we have to do something to improve our lives right here and right now, not simply wait to die. So I'm thinking that we need to dial up our awareness, our understanding, and our ability to act right now and corresponding with what's going on in the world. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really pleased to see Northaven taking on this tremendous challenge to face and deal with racism in our society and injustice. I think we need to see the connection between racism and the economic system as well.
Mhm.
And so those things need to be tied together.
Yes.
There's so much. The bottom line is, but let's not get stuck where we are. Let's move on and go forward. And so wherever you are, there's a role to play. If it's with a neighbor, it's with your child or your grandchild, or if it's with the social club, or if you hear a racist comment, how do you respond to that? How do you deal with that? How do you vote? Why do you vote? What do you do with your life? So I think all these things, we just have to question ourselves and really dial up our awareness and our understanding. And that's going to lead to action. So sometimes it seems like we can't understand and we don't know what to do. But once you understand, action becomes easy to do. So that's understanding is the main thing. So I think you're talking about reading and studying and having conversations that helps develop understanding. And once we have a better understanding, we'll know what to do.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I'm interested in your comments about, kind of the rewriting of history and, being able to explore some of the facts that may not have been given to us in past years. And one of the ways that's playing out today, obviously, is the debate over these statues and symbols that, supposedly are not racist. And yet when they were put up was, years after an event to glorify a past. And so that's so interesting that you mentioned that. But I love your focus too on empathy, not sympathy, but empathy. And to the best of our ability to have empathy for a person who is different from ourselves or has different experiences, helps us to move forward together as recognizing our common humanity. And so thank you for that.
So I just think the timing was right. This pandemic kind of had a sheltered in.
Yeah.
We had a chance to reflect, to get away from some of the everyday diversions. So I think it's not without reason to see how just that time to study, to reflect, to be by ourselves, even though we're lucky, to begin to have those conversations finally. And with seeing Floyd killed right before our eyes, to be murdered, we became another calling in a way. What are we doing about it? What is God saying to us when we see these things happening? What is our response? So I'm really hopeful that the protests may die, things go up and die down, and things pass and go forward, but we got to see some results in terms of removal of these idols, criminals, to looking at new policies for new leadership. It's got to be those kind of consequences, not just we burn up some energy. Now we got to see some structural change. We need to see some systematic change. We need to see some change in the leadership and how we go about thinking and acting as well. So I think it's calling us to do some deep reflection and deep action.
So you have an 8-year-old grandson.
Yes.
And I just wonder, what would you tell him about, what would you want for him in the future? And what would you tell him about working for social change?
Yeah. Well, I want him to really care about his life, himself, and others. I want him to really be a caring person, and I want him to be responsive to what he's seeing, and to be able to think through situations and act appropriately. It took him a great deal of nerve just a few hours ago to say, Grandpa, I don't want to Zoom with you about geography anymore. I want to play video games, and I want to watch the TV and not sit up here talking about the capital of this state or this national river or whatever. And so just to have the courage, I want him to be able to freely speak his mind and not to be beat up or abused or judged because he made those decisions. So he's in an environment with a loving mother and a loving father who give him the space, who help him direction, who kind of navigate him as well, being 8 years old. And so I see him a promising future, and I just want to make sure that when he steps out in the world, it's a lot safer than when I had to step out in the world. So my job is to make sure that we tear down some of these walls and this ignorance and this harmful deeds that are going on every day in the name of justice and law and order. And so let's practice a better society and for him to inherit. And that's my call, to get me in another gear to fighting harder for him.
Yeah.